here because we care. We care about Chicago. We care specifically about Chicago's modernist architecture. And we're going to talk about the issue of preserving our modernist legacy, our modernist buildings in general. And as some of you might know, specifically right now, the hot button issue is Prentice Hospital. For me, Prentice is a very special building. You walk down the street, there are a lot of boxes, and I've got nothing against boxes, but Prentice enlivens the street. It was a gift to me every single day walking past it. And it reminded me of when Chicagoans were on top of the world. As I say, modernism is our gift to the world. When Bertrand, Goldberg, and Mies van der Rohe were here, we said the rest of the world was a poor man's Chicago. And do we want to tear down what made us great at one time?
The Prentice building is one of the most important that have come along in a while, and I'm delighted that CAF was hosting this public debate on the merits of saving it.
I like the fact that there's debates about, like, should we preserve these buildings or not? Is it really important? Like, what's the significance to the city especially?
I think Bud Goldberg is a great architect. I think when one of his works is threatened, it's incumbent on us as members of the public with the Landmarks Commission to consider, is it a landmark?
I spent the last couple of weeks looking for a postcard of the Prentice building, and I did not find any postcards of the Prentice building.
I don't think we ought to decide the landmarks of our city based on postcards. The reason the river tour talks about Marina City, it's on the river. Jack, is there a single building that's been built in Streeterville in the last 20 years that's going to ever be a landmark?
Is that a reason for keeping what we've got, though?
My point is that Prentice is a piece of architecture that will never happen again. It was of a place and time that they developed something wholly unique, engineering-wise and design-wise, and for us to toss that away, I will tell you, all your kids will look back and say, why did you guys throw that building away?
As a student, it's better to not just, see the images, but I mean, what's the point if we can actually go to these places and get a feel for them ourselves?
In fact, a building is really worthy, it ought to be landmarked. Because I want to keep the best. I think you cheapen the process if you keep less than the best.
So who decides the best?
It is the task, the job of the government.
I'm going to bring back a conversation we had 20 years ago. You said, Jim, the thing that you need to remember as you're considering landmarking and such is the only people who get landmarked in Chicago are those without clout.
I don't know that I said that, but I will tell you there is a political element to many of these landmarkings, both ways. Both ways.
It concerns me that so much attention is focused on single buildings and adversarial relationships, whereas in fact, it's not landmark laws that save most buildings, it's other things like zoning laws. And I think also that those landmark laws are often being used for other reasons because people don't like what's being built otherwise and they have no other tools.
Predictability is very important. You need to know what your ownership rights are. If owners know what they have or what rights they don't have, I think this whole process would be a lot smoother.
It should be a living document of watching these buildings and assessing them. And yes, there's an arbitrary component to preservation taste and aesthetics as to what is valuable, but having the dialogue is necessary.
An audience member stated it very well when they said, the progressive ideas about saving what's best, and a lot of what was built in years gone by is certainly better than a lot of what's getting built now.
Let's talk also, for example, Prentice. It's concrete, and you know what? It's ugly. It's really ugly. It's beautiful, but it's ugly. Is that why people don't care?
One of the reasons we've had such problems with buildings by Bertrand Goldberg and Walter Netsch has been we've tended to like this strand of modernism and not another. These buildings of the 60s and 70s are the buildings that are most out of favor in the world right now.
Well, it often comes down to a marketing campaign of who's gotten attention at that time, and it reaches the public consciousness. Frank Lloyd Wright is now the darling of historic homes, but there was a time when people were selling off all the furniture, all the art glass, and they were selling for a song. Now they're beyond most people's budgets.
You know, today it is so easy to get people to be interested in the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, and they find it beautiful. Why is it so hard to get the average person interested to want to preserve modernism?
Well, part of this comes from the fact that the modern preservation movement came of age in the 1960s. It's this very interesting birth of this movement, which was against modernism, that has been now having to struggle a little bit with trying to embrace exactly the thing that it got started with opposing.
What's interesting to me is not so much the likelihood of taking it down or saving the building, but what it says about our sort of risk tolerance. And right now, we have very low risk tolerance. Why keeping this thing is very important.
It concerns me that we seem to be increasing exponentially the number of things we're preserving, and I wonder what that tells us about ourselves. A lot of this, I think, has to do with that fear of the future, and you see it in places like England. You also see it in central Paris. Now, a lot of people would prefer that. A lot of people would prefer central Paris. On the other hand, that's no longer the vibrant economic center it once was.
Why not disallow demolition unless the landowner has immediate financing and plans for a new structure?
Because you'd never get anything built.
If we take a little bit of time to figure out what the next best use is of a building, that extra time may have provided a new next great opportunity for a building.
Well, isn't it curious that in Chicago, many of the buildings we most venerate, all of those great skyscrapers of the late 19th century up through the early 20th century, these were done in the era of the most rapacious capitalism the world had ever seen. There were no controls, whatever. Isn't it interesting that we're trying to save those very buildings from the very forces that originally created them?
We don't have that faith in the future today, and so maybe it's an important thing to keep things in that environment because chances are the new things are not going to be very good. We just don't have confidence in them.
This has been fascinating to me. I've learned a lot. I think we all have. But give us your position now that we've been through this.
I look forward to working with Jim and his association when we honor Bud Goldberg by landmarking this building.
Didn't change your mind. Mary Brush.
I welcome opportunities to have these discussions because I think both districts and individual buildings are part of the public collective, and to be able to discuss the value is good for the betterment of all.
For me, stewardship is the big issue, and I think that sometimes that's fostered by preservation and by landmark laws. Sometimes it's not. I think there's a lot of other things that we could also be doing to make people more aware of the built environment generally and how they can care for it.
We build a tremendous amount of great architecture. Just the names Netsch, Mies, and Goldberg are known across the world. For us to even consider tearing down one of the great works of one of these architects would make us less of a city, I think.
These buildings that we're talking about were made and designed, built at a different time. And you can't get to know them from a postcard or even by driving past them. So I would recommend that each of us takes half an hour and goes to Prentice and just looks at it and just listens to it. Thank you all very much for making Chicago great and taking the time to come to Chicago Debates.